welcome to Badger Talk Quick Picks, which bring exciting happenings, resources, and talent from your UW flagship campus to the people of Wisconsin and beyond. My name is Olivia Gacka. I am a third-year PhD student in interdisciplinary theater studies with research focusing on historical and contemporary Irish theater, musical theater, and opera, and I am also an opera and theater stage director. I am pleased to introduce Dan Cavanagh, director of the Mead Witter School of Music. Today, Dan will talk about his experiences as a composer and pianist, paired alongside recent advances in neuroscience and aesthetics that illuminate why music is uniquely important to our varied experiences as human beings. He will discuss how composers, performers, and conductors partner with listeners in the moment to create an environment conducive to considering the human spirit, our place in this universe, and our relationships with each other and the world. Dan Cavanagh, director of the Mead Witter School of Music, is a composer and pianist who has garnered numerous awards in both areas. He received a 2009 Gold Medal Prize from the International Music Prize for Excellence in Composition for his work for trumpet and piano from The Barrage Comes Clarity. In 2017, he was awarded a Special Judges Citation in the American Prize for Chamber Music Composition for his work for trumpet ensemble and drum set, Waves. As a composer, Cavanagh has been commissioned to write for Latin Grammy-winning AfroBop Alliance, the legendary Patti LaBelle, and a wide range of classical and jazz performers across North America and Europe. Please welcome Dan Cavanagh.
Thank you so much, Olivia. I really appreciate that introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about a passion of mine, which is the human spirit and how music creates and interacts with that human spirit. So thank you very much for joining us today. Just a little bit more about me. I know Olivia talked about this, but I'm going to start by playing just a short example of some music I've composed, about 30 seconds long. This is from a piano concerto called Divining Reverence on the Far 80. All right, so there you heard the University of Texas at Arlington Faculty and Friends Chamber Orchestra, directed by a wonderful conductor, Dr. Cliff Evans, and that was me playing the piano. So just an example of some of the things that I do, and it kind of lays the groundwork for what I'm going to talk about today. So I have spent the vast majority of my life practicing the piano, composing music, and more in my adult years, thinking about how music really is one of the things that makes us human, right? And it's one of those things that we contemplate as a species. It doesn't matter what kind of music you like, right? Whether it's hip hop or classical music, or it's country western, or it's alt pop. It doesn't matter. Jazz. Really listening to music and participating in that act of, whether it's at the same time, so in a live concert, interacting with the musicians at the concert, or listening, so asynchronously listening through the radio or to some sort of stream. This is something that I really believe to the core of my being is an important thing for us to do, just like other types of art, because it really helps us understand who we are. It helps us understand, how humans fit into the cosmos, if you want to take it that big. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about some of the science and some of the philosophy behind how all this works and how that has kind of contributed to how I have worked on this in my life. I'm also going to talk just a little bit about the neuroscience of what's going on in our brains when we're participating in a musical exchange, so listening or performing music. There we go. I want to talk first and set the stage with some philosophy information. So there was a British philosopher named Lewis Arnaud Reid, And he was a big philosopher of aesthetics, which is the study of, some people call it the study of beauty, but in a philosophical sense, and also of epistemology. And epistemology is really a simple way to put this is the study of, in the human brain, cognitive success. So the philosophical thinking about cognitive success. What is cognitive success? Well, cognitive success is when we are appreciating something or trying to understand something, and that successful moment is when we know we understand it. So we're most used to knowledge. So, and this is what Reid would call propositional truth knowledge. So this is something where we make a proposition, so we say, I think this is happening, and then we can justify that by rationalizing and thinking through it, or by seeing evidence of it happening. That is one type of knowledge, and typically it's the kind of knowledge that most people think about when they hear the word knowledge, and what does that mean. But there's a thread in philosophy, and all these great thinkers who have really shown us that there are many kinds of knowledge, and that propositional truth knowledge, or just the normal kind of knowledge we think about, is just one of those. And so one thing I've been really interested in my career as a composer and a musician, and how we communicate with other human beings through music, is the type of knowledge that comes through the arts, right? And that is often referred to as aesthetic knowledge, right? So knowledge that comes from the contemplation of beauty or meaning outside of the constructs of language and rational thought. That's another kind of knowledge. And I think as musicians, whether we're composers or performers, and as people listening to music and appreciating music, we are participating in growing our understanding and knowledge without the use of words. And so to me, I really think about that a lot every time I am performing, every time I am composing. A lot of musicians and artists will talk about being an artist or a musician as a way of living, right? And so just like there are lots of ways of being in this world and ways of living through this world, there's also lots of ways of understanding and knowing. And this just isn't some sort of, fancy frou-frou concept that we've come up with throughout time in academia. This is really proven through studies, brain scans of showing what people's experiences are when they're having these kinds of aesthetic experiences. So this is something that really is indicative of the human experience. We don't always see this in animals. I want to talk about one other person to set the stage here, and this is an American poet named Robert Bly. Robert Bly just passed away a couple of years ago, but a really well-known American poet, and was very vocal, for example, against the Vietnam War. But he was from Minnesota, so not far from Wisconsin here. Minnesota's first poet laureate, for example, really well-known. He wrote an essay in 1967 that he then expanded in the early 70s into a book called Leaping Poetry. And this is a concept that poets now almost take for granted or talk about quite a bit, but Robert and his contemporaries were very instrumental in bringing this type of thinking into the American consciousness. So Robert was really invested in translating some of the poets from Europe and other countries in Asia, and talking about how these images in poetry really enter our brains and can create this psychological free association that can, and Robert would describe this as going from the known part of the mind into the unknown part of the mind and back, right? And so he would talk about how poetry can do this through the way that poets use their language. He had a brief statement in his essay and in other writings where he talked about how it was likely the case that this was true for other arts as well. His friend, the Swedish poet Tomas Tranströmer, really talked about this in how classical musicians would compose their music and how that also gave him that same experience, but he never really dove into it. And so some of my research has been into expanding Robert's concepts of the poetic leap, which he called it. So going from using image and art to go from kind of the familiar known part of your mind into these unfamiliar spaces and back, right? So kind of this journey, and expanding that into how I write my music and how I think about communicating with audience members and what my music will do for them as they're sitting through. Robert uses another analogy that I think is just really cool that I wanted to share with everybody. In ancient China, Chinese thinkers and poets would talk about the Chinese dragon, right? Dragons flying through the sky with a trail of smoke behind them. And the smoke was kind of like the mythological path to follow into new realms of experience, right? So whether that's experience of the mind or of knowledge or some other thing. So Robert always talked about really great poetry. So poetry of like Federico Garcia Lorca from Spain, for example, always had a lot of dragon smoke in his poems. He would also say that about Yeats as well. So just a really cool concept to think of, like kind of a physical thing being a map into the kind of inner recesses of how we think about art. So those two things set the stage here for my concept here, which I think is most people would say that they have some sort of experience with this. And this is called the aesthetic leap. So this is an extension of the poetic leap, right? And so like I said before, aesthetic knowledge, it's its own type of knowledge, right? So we all have had this experience in our lives. Think about when you've had the chills for some reason or another, not from being cold. We have a snowstorm in Madison right now. But, from some sort of really important thing that's happened, or you've seen this really incredible film or seen an artwork or heard a really incredible piece of music, and you get the chills. Scientists call that frisson, right? When you get those chills down your spine. Well, that's one way of getting after this idea that aesthetic knowledge is its own type of experiential knowledge, right? And I just want to reemphasize again, this is a way of knowing about things in the world that doesn't necessarily have to do with language. So what I have proposed here in my work, and that has really deep currency and really seems to make sense to me, is that this movement between not knowing in an aesthetic sense and knowing. So this is kind of like the eureka moment when you're listening to a piece of music and all of a sudden you just get it, right? And it just really speaks to you. To me, that's the aesthetic leap. That's this moment where you leap into new aesthetic knowledge. It doesn't often happen gradually. It kind of happens all at once. It's, one psychologist has talked about moments like this as the aesthetic aha. It's kind of like the aha moment. I get it. Aha. I get it. Right? So this is the aesthetic leap. And so when I'm composing, I am really thinking about trying to create these moments in the music, which will then be enacted by the musicians playing in consort with the audience members listening and engaging in that space, to kind of create these moments where you really have this holy cow, I get it kind of moment. But you're not doing that with language. You're doing it down here in your gut, right? And that's the aesthetic leap. One really interesting thing about music and also other forms that are not static. So for example, a film, right? Or dance, or some types of drama. These things happen in real time, right? They don't. A painting on the wall, you can look away from it and you don't notice that. You can look back to it and continue processing. If you somehow like close your ears for a minute in a concert, put your hands over and you miss part of the piece, you're going to miss something crucial. You can't go back to that unless you start over. So this element of time in music is really important to creating this aesthetic leap, right? It also requires human context. This is, I'm not sure this is scientifically proven, but this is one reason like why my dogs at home don't really react when music is played, for example, or if they do, it's not a very human type of reaction, right? They don't internalize that aesthetic knowledge in the same way that we do. So that human context is really important here. So how does this connect to the human spirit? Well, to me, this is really all about what makes us human, right? This is not the only thing, right? This ability to have aesthetic experiences and to gain other kinds of knowledge that are not what Reid called propositional truth knowledge, right? So knowledge that you can, through rational thinking, come to from a set of facts and connecting those facts into some new kind of knowledge. This is an experiential type of knowledge that really is unique to human beings in many ways. And so I'm constantly thinking, this is one of the things I love about my job, not only as a composer and a musician, but also as a professor, because I think we're really discussing and teaching and learning all the time about the things that we do. These things really contribute to our humanity. Right now, especially, we are in a very accelerated age of generative AI and other types of AI. And so I think it's really causing a lot of people to be introspective about, okay, well, if we can get computers to essentially at least make us think that they're thinking like humans, what does it really mean to be human? And so I think, to me, it means let's contemplate these things that really are human experiences, and this is one of them. The thing that brings me some sense of satisfaction around that this idea has some currency is that there is this burgeoning study of this experience in human beings. So this whole field of study called neuroaesthetics. So that's a combination of neuroscience, right, the study of biological processes in our brains, and the philosophy of aesthetics. How do we appreciate beauty in these aesthetic moments? This is really a field only about 20 years old, a little more, and so it's a really exciting time for scientists in this field. And so if you're interested in this kind of thing, there's some really good overview books on neuroaesthetics, which are written for a really, a more of a general audience, that really give you some of the sense of how scientists and philosophers and musicians and artists are investigating this kind of thing. But there have been many studies that have shown that these experiences through functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, and other kinds of imaging have really shown what's going on in our brains. So, the only other thing I wanted to share with you is that this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It's kind of this old adage of, if a tree falls in the woods, is there anyone to hear it? Well, if I write music in my office, but no one's out there listening to it, am I actually creating an environment to, consider the human condition for other people? Probably not. So it takes both the creators of music and the listeners of music to really activate this idea of considering what it means to be a human being. So anyway, quick wrap up. Participating in music as a listener is a different way for you to enhance your knowing, right? It's different than knowing facts or proving theorems, for example, in mathematics. It's an activity that really highlights aspects of being human, and there are many scientific studies in the past 20 years that are really starting to show us physically what's happening when we have these aesthetic experiences. Thanks again for watching this Badger Talk. I'm really excited to be able to share some of my research and music with you. I hope this has prompted you to think of some other ways that we can begin to know about the world that don't involve propositional truth or normal knowledge. I'm going to leave you with an excerpt of A Piece of Mind that was written for a wind symphony. This is called Even If the Last Bullet Hits My Chest. Thanks again.